HOA shut down my grandparents' nursing home, called it non-compliant, forged signatures, fake letters, a land deal buried under lies. Their HOA office now stands where our garden once grew. So I bought the lot across the street, filed the permits, and at dawn, the bulldozer arrived. Because some legacies don't die, they get paved into concrete. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Somewhere between mile marker 112 and the rusted "Welcome to Pinehurst" sign, I realized how long it had been. 15 years. 15 years since I walked these roads with my grandfather on early fall mornings, the smell of rain and cut grass soaking into my hoodie as he waved at every car that passed. 15 years since I helped Grandma plant tomatoes behind the main building, right where the sunlight landed mid-morning. She called it God's spotlight. And now? Now the place was a hollow shell. The nursing home they built, ran with everything they had, stood lifeless. Windows boarded, paint paid, grass overgrown around the wheelchair ramps. The place used to hum with motion, soft jazz from portable radios, bingo numbers echoing through cracked intercoms, shuffleboard games on the patio while cardinals fluttered along the fence line. Now, there was just silence, and the buzz of something forgotten. I parked across the street, sat there longer than I meant to, just looking. It used to be called the Garden Arms. Not because it was fancy, but because Grandma said every life deserves to bloom somewhere. My grandfather was the kind of man who believed in handwritten ledgers and remembering the birthdays of every resident. He called them neighbors, not patients. They ran that home for 34 years until the HOA decided it didn't fit the vision of the new Pinehurst. A few developers had moved in, young couples wanted peace and property value harmony. The HOA wanted uniformity. And the nursing home, it became the target. The shutdown came quickly, under the banner of non-compliance with modern accessibility codes, which was ironic since my grandfather helped write the original town zoning standards. They were cited, overruled, and swept under the rug. When I asked around, no one gave straight answers. But the name that kept surfacing was Diane Keller, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of aesthetics. The kind of woman who talks about clean lines while gutting the soul of a neighborhood. I walked the perimeter. The garden was gone, ripped out, paved over. In its place stood a smug, glassy building marked Pinehurst Residential Community Board Office. 4 solar lamps, a flag, and a concrete path that led straight into what used to be Grandma's strawberry rows. That hit me harder than the empty halls. It wasn't just the loss of the building. It was the theft of meaning. I found myself staring at the door of that HOA office longer than I should have. Imagining Diane sitting behind some reclaimed wood desk, sipping eco tea while printing out another violation for mailbox height or seasonal wreaths. I thought about how they shut the home down while my grandparents were still alive. How Grandpa quietly packed up the ledgers and Grandma stopped talking about sunlight. They passed within months of each other. Some said it was, I think it was heartbreak. And now I stood here with keys to nothing and memories of everything. The lot across the street caught my eye. Vacant, overgrown, forgotten by the city, but still marked on the zoning map as commercial buffer land. It used to be part of the original Garden Arms acreage, before the HOA sliced it off in one of their landscape visioning votes. Technically, it was no longer connected to the home, but spiritually, it still belonged. And in that moment, staring across from what was lost to what remained, something began to rise in me. Not rage, not revenge. Resolve. They took the home, but they left the root. And no one, not even a clipboard-wielding tyrant in a pastel suit, gets to rewrite a legacy without earning it. Not while I'm still standing. It started with a box in my aunt's attic. She'd kept some of my grandparents' records after the closure. Old financials, inspection reports, meeting minutes, the kind of paper trail most people ignore until it's the only thing left to tell the truth. I cleared a space on the dining room table, lined up the files, and started reading. Page after page, I traced the decline of the Garden Arms, not through failures, but through precision-targeted bureaucracy. One document stood out, a notice from the HOA citing non-conformance with post-2015 zoning enhancement standards. It sounded official, dangerous, final. Except it wasn't. Because I cross-referenced the cited code with the county's public ordinances. That clause, it didn't even exist in 2015. It was added 2 years later in a supplemental HOA amendment. Diane had personally proposed. And that's when I realized this wasn't a violation. It was a trap. The shutdown wasn't about safety, or accessibility, or whatever buzzwords Diane fed into her newsletter. It was about control. A quiet, paper-bound coup, hidden behind signatures and seals. I dove deeper. Among the archived PDFs was a file labeled Community Support Documentation, Facility Closure Vote. 26 letters, all supposedly written by local residents, all asking the HOA to protect the neighborhood from outdated infrastructure. The phrasing was too polished, too coordinated. So I picked one at random. A letter signed by Margaret. I remembered Margaret. She was one of the first residents at Garden Arms. She used to knit blankets for incoming veterans. Sweet woman, always had butterscotch candies in her pockets. She died 4 months before that letter was dated. I double-checked the obituary. There was no mistake. They forged her name. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Several other residents hadn't lived in the area in years. A few were out of state. One was listed as currently undergoing care at Garden Arms at the time, making the letter self-incriminating. I started visiting old neighbors. Some were hesitant at first, still fearful of HOA retaliation. But when I mentioned my grandparents, their faces softened. I knew something was off, one woman whispered. Diane came by with a clipboard, said they were voting to expand green space. She never mentioned shutting down the facility. Another, a retired nurse who used to work there, had more to say. They said we failed a safety inspection, but no one from the county ever came. We were up code. I saw the reports myself. She handed me a copy of her final paycheck. Issued by Elmbridge Partners. Who the hell is that? I did some digging. Elmbridge was a holding company formed 6 months before the shutdown, registered to a business address in a neighboring county. But the real kicker, its listed managing officer was Alan Keller, Diane's cousin. The dots weren't just connecting, they were screaming. The HOA had shut down a fully functional senior care facility, displaced dozens of elderly residents, and funneled the land into a shell company tied to the same people who pushed the shutdown, all under the illusion of compliance. They didn't dismantle the home because it was unsafe. They dismantled it because it was in the way. Of what? I didn't know yet, but I could feel it, like a low hum behind the drywall. Something deeper, bigger. I organized the forged letters, made a digital archive, and stored physical copies in a fireproof lockbox. I logged dates, highlighted inconsistencies. I even color-coded the chain of custody behind the closure. Not out of obsession, out of preparation. Because I wasn't just building a case. I was building a timeline, a fuse. And every line I read made one thing painfully clear. They thought the story ended when my grandparents died. They were wrong. Most people think when land changes hands, the past goes with it. But that's the thing about dirt. It remembers everything. After I discovered the shell company, Elmbridge Partners, and Diane's familial connection to its managing officer, I knew the shutdown wasn't just personal. It was profitable. But paper trails have a way of trying to stay hidden, especially when those doing the hiding think no one's watching. They didn't count on me. I pulled property transfer records from the county clerk's office. Buried between zoning requests and innocuous landscaping permits was a title reassignment form, one line in a scanned document that changed everything. 6 months after the Garden Arms was shut down, the property was quietly sold to Elmbridge for a laughably low fee, reclassified from community elder care to future mixed-use public amenities. The buyer? A blind trust out of state. The manager signing on behalf of the trust. Alan Keller. The transfer included almost everything: the land, the structure, the surface, and air rights. Almost. I flipped through the original deed, still preserved in my aunt's old fireproof filing cabinet, and noticed something Diane had clearly missed. A clause, handwritten, notarized, and still valid. Utility and subsurface mineral rights retained by the original proprietors and their living descendants for 99 years. Utility rights, meaning they can own the land, but they can't touch what's under it. That includes gas lines, water mains, access to any infrastructure connected to the grid. In most cases, that clause is overlooked. Outdated, just legal filler from another era. But in this case, it was my opening. I called an old friend from law school, now a land use attorney in Denver. Someone who owed me a favor. I gave him the basic outline, omitting names. He went silent for a long beat after I read the mineral clause. Then, if it's valid and you're an heir, they can't legally multiply the land without your release of claim. Not without exposing themselves to an easement challenge, or worse. And if they try, they'll be violating utility access laws. That's state and federal, civil at minimum, criminal if they knew. I smiled for the first time in days. Because I knew they knew. And now they were exposed. I requested a title review and began drafting a notice of potential encumbrance. A quiet legal shadow that would sit on the property file like a dormant volcano. Anyone who tried to build, dig, or expand would trip it. And just like that, their little land flip wasn't so clean anymore. It was radioactive. I didn't announce anything, no confrontation, no threats. Instead, I started drawing blueprints, not of their building, of the lot across the street, the one they forgot, the one they thought had no value. But just like the clause they buried, it still belonged to us in spirit and soon in function. Because I wasn't just going to fight them, I was going to mirror them. And I knew exactly where to start. And that's when the plan took shape. I formed a single-member LLC out of state, under a name that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. Stonebridge Community Design, LLC. Clean, boring, completely disconnected from my last name. Then I contacted a real estate agent 3 towns over, someone with no HOA ties, offering full fast value on the lot contingent on quiet escrow. No negotiation, no noise. 2 weeks later, it was mine. I didn't celebrate. No champagne, no smirking at their windows. I just filed the next set of paperwork, a permit application for a community resource enhancement project, structured as a mixed-use civic improvement plan with ADA-compliant access. The documents were vague on purpose. Technically legal, completely non-threatening. And just like that, the first line was drawn. I paid for fencing. Chain link. Temporary but clean. Installed overnight by a local crew I tipped generously to keep their mouths shut. By morning, it looked like a construction staging site, orderly, functional, and absolutely within compliance. But the effect was immediate, Diane noticed. I saw her the next day, standing at the edge of the HOA's decorative fountain, arms crossed, staring across the street like she'd just discovered a termite infestation. She had a folder in one hand, a phone in the other. I watched from a parked car, a block down. She didn't know yet, didn't know who owned it, didn't know what it was for. And that uncertainty, that was my advantage. Because Diane had built her empire on knowing, on surveilling, on getting ahead of rumors before they became resistance. But I wasn't whispering. I was building, quietly, legally, deliberately. I updated the LLC's mailing address to a secure P.O. box. All permits went through the proper municipal portals. No red flags, no noise. The town clerk waved them through without a second glance. "It's good to see someone investing in this end of the district," she'd said. Oh, I was investing. In silence. In symbolism. In leverage. A week later, I had a small crew begin site prep. Nothing major, just gravel clearing and soil testing markers. Orange spray paint on the ground. A porta-john in the corner. It looked like nothing, but it felt like everything. Neighbors started asking questions. "What's going in over there? Anyone know who bought it?" Diane didn't answer. I imagine it was killing her. She filed a public inquiry to the zoning office. Standard form. Requesting plans and contact info for the permit applicant. I saw the copy of her request in the clerk's weekly intake log. I also saw the response. Permits valid. Contact listed as Stonebridge Community Design. No public meeting required due to zone classification. Translation? She had no say. The very tool she used to erase my grandparents' legacy, weaponized zoning, had just slipped out of her hands. And I hadn't said a word. I didn't need to. Because the next phase wasn't about confrontation. It was about construction. Some weapons don't make noise when they fire. Sometimes it's the scratch of a pen, a digital form submitted before lunch. A zoning code reference embedded so deeply in legalese, no one thinks to question it until it's too late. I submitted the final permit package under Stonebridge Community Design LLC at 10:34 a.m. on a Tuesday. Just 4 documents: a site use proposal, drainage compliance, environmental neutrality waiver, and buried in the appendices, a request for permitted development of a community access parking facility. The location: Lot 47, the lot across from the HOA office. The justification: overflow parking for community events, elder accessible spaces, and public use resource improvement. All by the book, all wrapped in friendly language, no threats, no confrontations, just the slow, silent grind of bureaucracy turning in my favor. By Thursday, the town zoning office had marked it pre-approved, pending inspection. No public notice needed due to the lot's classification. No HOA veto required. Just a signature from the city engineer. Diane didn't know yet, but by Friday morning, she found out. I knew because the city clerk emailed me. Got a call from the HOA president today, concerned about your project, asking about groundwater runoff and tree preservation. I told her everything checks out. She didn't sound happy. No doubt. The HOA had made this bed, and now it was theirs to lie in. The same code they used to declassify my grandparents' nursing home as non-conforming was the one I used to reclassify Lot 47 as utility-aligned public service space. Their weaponized loophole had a blind spot. It couldn't block what it couldn't control. And they never expected anyone to read the fine print better than they did. Diane, of course, escalated. She called a special HOA board session, on record, to address unauthorized developments threatening community cohesion. She petitioned for a pause order, citing potential misalignment with Pinehurst aesthetic objectives. I read the request. It was beautifully hollow. Because the town engineer's reply was already posted online. All permits legally compliant. No grounds for delay. A puppet operating within designated use rights under Zoning Clause 7-114C. HOA has no jurisdiction over this classification. That clause. She added it. 3 years ago, when she was trying to get fast-track approval for a community dog park that never materialized. Now it was the sword she impaled her own argument with. I didn't attend the meeting. I didn't need to. But I heard about it. Apparently, she tried to bluff her way through, demanding to know who was behind the LLC. When told it wasn't legally required to disclose ownership under town guidelines, she lost it, red-faced, voice cracking. One neighbor reportedly asked, "Why do you care so much about a parking lot?" That's when I knew the tide had shifted. It wasn't just me against her anymore. It was her against optics, her against the law. Her against the same cold procedural indifference she once used to shut down the garden arms. And now every passing day meant more gravel, more poured concrete, more visibility. Because while she made threats through mailboxes and memos, I made progress through paperwork. One form at a time, a new surface was being born. Gravel first, then framed rebar. By the time the neighborhood started waking up, the old entrance looked like it had been evacuated, not renovated. And across the street, progress hummed along uninterrupted. Because this wasn't a demolition site, it was a statement. I watched from the driver's seat of my rental car, parked 2 blocks down, hoodie on, coffee in hand. My name nowhere near the permits. My fingerprints scrubbed from the LLC trail. But my signature, it was in the timing, the silence, the elegance of consequence. By 7 Alvarin, a few residents had gathered. Confused, curious, whispering. I saw Diane arrive 10 minutes later, marching toward the construction tape in her lemon-yellow blazer, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they regretted waking up at all. She pointed, shouted something to the crew foreman, who simply handed her a clipboard. I knew what it said. Authorized Development, Permit Sun 4047A. Site Classification, Public Use Infrastructure, Stonebridge Community Design, LLC. She looked like someone who'd just been told her house was built on sand. There were cameras too. Local news had been tipped, anonymously, to the rapid redevelopment of contested land in Pinehurst. They arrived just in time to capture Diane's expression as she realized that what was being built wasn't going to stop at the fence line. Because what stood across from her, what was rising, wasn't a building. It was memory. It was judgment. It was everything she thought she had erased, now returned in cold, silent concrete. And no matter how many emails she sent, no matter how many bylaws she quoted, none of them could unpour the foundation that was already setting beneath her feet. The irony wasn't lost on me. This woman, who once shut down a place of care to install a community office, now had look out her window and see lines being painted for public parking. ADA ramps, drainage channels. A blue sign with a white P and a tagline that read, "For all who served." I hadn't planned the tagline, but someone on the crew must have known. Maybe one of them had a grandmother displaced from the garden arms. Maybe they just understood what it meant to reclaim a space not with anger, but with asphalt. Not with fire, but with form. By 8:00 a.m., the HOA newsletter inbox was flooded. By noon, the site had curb framing installed. And by the end of the week, the lot would be paved. The office would still stand, but it would forever face the reminder. A parking lot they couldn't block. On ground they once stole. Laid with the same indifference they used to bury compassion. Now hardened, permanent, and impossibly, irrevocably public. By the following Monday, the first satellite truck pulled up. Bright white, station logo painted across the side. The kind of vehicle that usually showed up for ribbon cuttings or storm damage. Not this time. Someone had leaked the story, not just about the parking lot, but about the shutdown. The forged letters. The shell company. The dead woman whose signature had somehow appeared on HOA petitions. I don't know who sent the file, but I have a guess. The local reporter, a woman named Lisa from Channel 8, sat up right in front of the newly poured curb. Behind her, the camera captured a line of fresh concrete, blue handicap markings, and a glinting sign that read, "Community Parking, Open Access, in Memory of Garden Arms Residents." Her story aired at 6 p.m. sharp. The headline burned across the screen like a reckoning. Nursing home destroyed by HOA, greed. Now a parking lot sits in protest. The story spread faster than Diane's memos ever had. By morning, the HOA inbox was in freefall. Board members started scrambling to distance themselves, emails leaked, statements issued. 3 resignations came before noon. But it was the interview that sealed it. A woman named Sherry, a retired nurse who had worked at Garden Arms for 12 years, stood on camera holding a framed photo of the building as it once was. "I watched them shut it down," she said, voice shaking. "They didn't care about the people. They cared about control. And now they want to talk about property values." She looked into the lens, tears in her eyes. "They buried our history, but someone remembered." By evening, the city council had called an emergency meeting, not to stop the parking lot, but to review the HOA's authorization authority. The council minutes from 2 years prior were re-examined. The shell company transfer was brought into the light. Someone from the state zoning board confirmed what I already knew. This smells like a manipulated land reassignment under false pretenses. Diane didn't show her face that week. Rumor was she'd left town. Her office blinds stayed drawn. Her name was scrubbed from the HOA website within 72 hours. And, across the street, cars began to pull in. Not many, just a few at first. Mostly older folks. Some with walkers, some just sitting on the concrete ledge where the tomato garden used to be. One man brought a lawn chair and a newspaper. Another lit a candle and didn't say a word. It wasn't just a parking lot anymore. It was a memorial, a confrontation, a truth too long buried, now paved into permanence. "Matthew R. Langston," I said. A whisper rippled across the room, some faces lit with recognition, others with regret. Diane froze. I opened the folder. Inside, notarized deed history, proof of forged support letters, a certified transfer notice for the parcel across the street, and a legal declaration of easement control on the Garden Arms site, still under my family's retained rights. I laid each document down, one by one. No raised voice, no accusations, just paper and silence. "I'm here on behalf of my grandparents, James and Ellie Langston," I said. "They built the Garden Arms not for profit, but for purpose. You took that from them. I pulled out one last sheet. My grandfather left this behind. He wrote it 2 weeks before he passed. He never got to read it at the last community meeting. But I unfolded the letter. To the good people of Pinehurst, this home was built on service, not status. Every brick, every meal, every moment was offered with love. If the building must one day go, so be it, but let it not go forgotten. Let the memory remain somewhere, a place where someone might sit and remember what it meant to care for one another. People cried. One woman in the second row covered her mouth with both hands. I closed the letter gently. They took the building, I said, my voice firm. Low. But they couldn't take what it stood for. Diane opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not this time. The chair cleared his throat, almost apologetically. We've received a notice from the City Council. The HOA board is being formally dissolved, pending legal review. The Garden Arms lot is under memorial zoning review, and will be transitioned to community heritage designation. He looked at Diane. Your authority here is over. No one clapped. No one cheered, because some endings are too solemn for noise. Instead, I turned, letter still in hand, and walked out, through the doors, past the news cameras, and toward the place across the street, where a bench now sat under a quiet plaque, in memory of the Garden Arms, a home built with care, never forgotten. Lot 47 is finished now. Not just the asphalt, not just the lines or ramps or signposts. It's something else, something harder to describe, because it doesn't rise like a building. It settles, like memory, like meaning. It started as a parking lot. That's what the permit said. That's what the zoning board signed off on. But I had other plans. We added benches, raised flower beds, a shaded pavilion with quiet seating and soft lights for evenings. The far corner became a chess table, flanked by 2 iron chairs bolted into the concrete, and next to it, beneath a simple awning, stands a weatherproof cabinet stocked with books, large print editions, crossword puzzles, a box of knit shawls and blankets for anyone who needs them. At the center sits a bronze plaque, mounted into the base of a stone bench, in memory of every elder forced out before their time. May peace sit longer than power ever stood. We called it a drop-in space. No forms, no fees. Just a place for those left behind to have somewhere to go. Somewhere to be seen. The first week, only a handful came, some out of curiosity, some out of grief. A few recognized me and nodded without words. One man in a battered navy cap sat alone by the bench for over an hour. He didn't speak, just looked at the building across the street. The one that used to issue fines for unapproved flag placement. Now, every window of that building looks out onto what they tried to erase. The HOA office still exists, technically. A hollow structure with hollow files, waiting for a new name, a new charter. But whatever power it once had, it's gone. Stripped, evaporated in the face of something stronger than policy. Remembrance. And not just for my grandparents, for everyone who was told their years had passed their usefulness. For everyone who was relocated under the guise of compliance. For every nurse who clocked out one day and never got to return. This lot, this strip of earth once left to rot, has become something sacred. Because the truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted restoration. And sometimes the most lasting justice doesn't come in the form of punishment, but presence. So I stayed. I didn't leave town like I planned. I bought a house nearby. I walk the lot every morning. Sometimes I pick up litter. Sometimes I just sit on the bench and read my grandfather's letter again. His words feel different now, like they've been answered. The last addition I made wasn't structural. It was symbolic. Across from the HOA's old marble sign, I had 3 words carved into the outer retaining wall of Lot 47. Quietly, tastefully, unmistakably, the garden endures. No one defaced it. No one dared. And maybe that's the real win. They built walls. I poured concrete. One was meant to exclude. The other was built to endure. What would you do if the place your family built was buried under lies and luxury signage? They paved over legacy. I returned with legal blueprints and a bulldozer. Because when power forgets its purpose, someone has to remind it, brick by brick. If you've ever watched injustice hide behind a clipboard, stick around. This war isn't over. It just found a louder foundation.